Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the National Sea Grant Law Center's monthly webinar. My name is Tara Bowling, and I'm an attorney at the National Sea Grant Law Center. And I also have Kathy Janessy, another Law Center attorney here.
Hello, everyone.
So today we are discussing the Law Center's advisory service. We are going to talk about submitting a question to the service, the process of developing the final product, as well as some of our most recent requests. So to get started, Kathy, do you want to tell us a little bit about the National Sea Grant Law Center's advisory service?
Sure. So the Law Center's advisory service, the legal research service provided free of charge to sea grant programs and its constituents. But we should know that the Law Center is prohibited from providing legal advice or becoming involved in litigation. Because of this, the information provided by the Law Center through the advisory service is intended for informational purposes only. So organizations requesting legal information should always seek independent professional legal advice before taking action on the issue.
Great, thank you. And just to be clear, the program asking the question doesn't need to fund the research, right?
That's right, and we get that question a lot actually. So our advisory service is free. At times, a question that a program has asked has turned into a larger research project, and if that happens, we would work with the program on how that bigger research project would be funded.
Great, so let's talk a little bit about the subject matter that the Law Center covers in its advisory request.
Yes. So while an advisory request needs to involve an identifiable legal question, the Law Center will answer questions relating to all regulatory levels, from local ordinances, international agreements and treaties, as well as information on legislation pending before state and federal legislatures.
Okay, great. So today we're going to go through a few examples of past advisory requests to kind of give you an idea of some of the questions we've answered in the past. And I just want to mention that in the event a request is outside the Law Center's area of expertise, the Law Center will identify alternative information services that the program might be able to use.
So Tara, if a program thinks they have a legal question for us, how does the program need to submit an advisory request?
Well, all advisory requests should be submitted by or through Sea Grant personnel, which includes the director, the communication and education staff, extension leaders, individual extension agents, and other employees of the individual Sea Grant College program, as well as NOAA line offices.
So those are the entities that can use our service. Are there any other requirements for submission?
Yes. I want to note that personnel from Sea Grant College programs that send us questions should always inform their director prior to submitting an advisory request to the Law Center, just to make sure we all stay on the same page and everyone's informed of what's going on. And I want to note that we cannot take requests from the general public. Though members of the general public are encouraged to submit legal questions through their local Sea Grant office or extension agent.
Okay, so Tara, there are other layers in the legal network in Sea Grant. So what if the program requesting the use of our advisory service has a Sea Grant legal program in their state?
Okay, so since there are other legal programs throughout the Sea Grant network, when appropriate, we will redirect requests. For example, if we got a question from the Gulf of Mexico region, we might redirect it to Mississippi, Alabama Sea Grant Legal Program or the Louisiana Sea Grant Legal Program. Requests from Rhode Island or North Carolina might be directed to the legal programs in those states. So the next step is to pinpoint the legal issue that we will research.
So how do we go about doing that, Tara?
Okay, so if you have some kind of legal issue, but you're not sure what the question is to ask, you should definitely reach out to the Law Center, and we can work through the issue with you to develop a legal question that we can answer. Kathy, you recently worked on a request from South Carolina that took a little while to identify the issue. Can you talk about that process?
Sure. So for that South Carolina request, a shellfish farmer was told that he couldn't use his dock at his house for commercial purposes. The local zoning board said he couldn't use it in this way, so he reached out to the Sea Grant program on how to proceed. So while we couldn't give the Sea Grant program specific information on the steps he needed to take going forward because that would be legal advice, we worked with the Sea Grant program on developing a more general research question on how the state, county, and other jurisdictions nearby regulated the commercial use of docks.
Okay, and another way that a question might arise is when a specific event will trigger some very general legal issues.
That's right. So for instance, after Hurricane Sandy, we provided background research on the effect of the storm on property lines in both New York and New Jersey, since that was a question that a lot of people in that region had at the time.
Yeah, that's a good example of it. So one issue that we do face through the advisory service is that, as Kathy mentioned earlier, we cannot answer specific legal advice for a specific issue. We can provide background legal research for informational purposes, but we cannot answer very specific questions. So now let's move on and talk about what a final product might look like.
Sure. So our advisory requests can actually take a variety of forms, from quick answers over the phone or email, to short memos or fact sheets, to longer reports and white papers. The result of the research really is going to be a function of both the legal question and the need of the program. So we have picked a couple of examples of our past research to show this range, which we want to go through now. So Tara, you worked on a series of fact sheets. Can you tell us more about how those projects worked?
Yeah, so up here, this is the example of one of the fact sheets that I worked on. A couple of years ago, a Great Lakes group came to us and they were interested in compiling information on purchasing and selling aquatic organisms in order to stop the spread of invasive species. We did a fact sheet that pet stores and consumers could use when buying and selling these organisms for their stores or aquariums or water gardens. And hopefully they were able to use this information to prevent the sale and spread of the invasive species. And Kathy, you did a more traditional request recently that resulted in a memo. Can you talk about that one?
Sure. So recently, Maryland Sea Grant asked a stormwater-related question to our advisory service. So Howard County in Maryland is working on a project to install residential stormwater best management practices, or BMPs. So the county is claiming the impervious surfaces treated by these BMPs toward its municipal separate storm sewer system permit, also known as an MS4 permit, which is under the Clean Water Act. So the county is covering 75% of the cost for these BMPs, with the homeowners paying the other 25% of the cost. And in addition, the homeowners will be responsible for maintaining those BMPs. So Maryland Sea Grant is interested in what steps the county needed to take in regards to the maintenance and monitoring of these BMPs, including whether they needed to enforce a penalty against the homeowner if the BMP isn't maintained, because the counties were kind of worried about the liability in dealing with taking the credit and not necessarily the BMPs being maintained. So for this question, I did what we think of as a more traditional advisory request. So it's a memo that goes through the background and various legal issues involved with the question. So as you can see, it starts with kind of framing the question, but then goes through more background information about the MS4 program in Maryland, as well as the role that the Chesapeake Bay TMDL plays in the regulation, as well as the requirements that these programs put on counties in the state generally. And then the memo kind of proceeds more into specifically the requirements of Howard County's permit, and then goes on to conclude with some general takeaways regarding the issue. I should also mention, while we're talking about Maryland, is that sometimes programs take one of our more traditional memos and transform it to use as outreach in the state. So, for instance, I previously did another stormwater request from Maryland Sea Grant, but then they decided to convert to a fact sheet that the general public could use. So, Tara, you've worked on one that ended in a longer report. Can you talk a little bit more about that process?
Yes, I sure can. The one I wanted to show you today is from Texas Sea Grant. This is an example of the longer type report. And as many of you know, Texas has complicated coastal access issues, and the Texas Sea Grant commissioned a paper on coastal access rights in the state. And so we worked with a law student at the University of Houston Law School to write the paper. And the paper, let's see, I can scroll through a little bit. It shows you the table of contents. We discussed the Texas Open Beaches Act and the impact of a recent court case on the public access rights, as well as other public access issues. So let's scroll through a little bit. And then we'll go back here, and we're going to talk a little bit about where our requests end up. So we send them back to the requesting agency or person, but they are also all available on our webpage and can be used as a source of information. Okay. Okay, it's not pulling up our website. That's okay.
I think maybe let's go through the rest of the webinar and then we'll go out of the PowerPoint and go onto the website so we can go through it for everyone. I think that will work best with the time.
Sounds great. Okay, so now we've talked about the final product. Let's talk about how long the process actually takes to get the product from start to finish.
Sure. So Tara, the time frame for completing the request is really a function of a couple of different factors. So first, we will work with the program to determine the time frame that they will need to answer. So then, depending on the schedules of our attorneys here at the Law Center, we try to complete that request within that time. So obviously, shorter, more informal requests can be completed a lot quicker because it's just an email or a phone call. But longer reports and memos and more complicated legal issues could take longer. So again, there is no set time frame, but we do our best to accommodate the program asking the question as much as possible.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so now let's move on and talk about some of our recent requests. One of the most recent ones that we had was one that I did for Michigan Sea Grant, and they came to us and asked for information on the use of the International Great Lakes Datum, or the IGLD, in Great Lakes state law. The IGLD is used to measure water levels in the Great Lakes St. Lawrence River Basin. And the IGLD was developed through the use of measurements and benchmarks that generally align with sea level. And the first IGLD was called IGLD 1955, and the datum is updated every 25 to 30 years. And the most recently done one was in 1985. And so they're going to update it again soon, and New York Sea Grant and Michigan Sea Grant received a small NOAA grant to begin education to groups about the IGLD 2020 update process. And so Michigan Sea Grant came to us and requested information on how the Great Lakes states have incorporated IGLD into state law. So we were able to use traditional legal research methods to search state laws and write up a memo outlining what we've found.
Yes, so that's a pretty interesting project. And as well, our director, Stephanie Ops, is currently working on a request on whether FDA guidance related to the sale of seafood is mandatory for states to follow. So this question arose related to actions taken in regards to the Dungeness crab fishery on the West Coast. So California Sea Grant reached out to us to want to know the role that the FDA and the states played in the process and whether the states needed to follow FDA's lead on those issues.
Okay, and then I'm currently working on another request for Michigan Sea Grant on trespasser liability. This came about because we had previously done some research for Michigan Sea Grant on whether local governments and landowners participating in Michigan's Great Lakes water trails would be subject to liability. So recently, a constituent came to Michigan Sea Grant and asked whether water trail users would be liable for trespass on the private property in emergency situations. So in answering this question, we'll look at the public's right to use the water, the landowner's right to exclude the public from private property, the law of trespass, and any exceptions that might exist for that.
All right, so let's try now to get to our website, and we apologize for technical difficulties for lawyers and not IT professionals, but I think we should be able to share our screen so we can get to the website and kind of go through our advisory requests as a all.
Okay.
Let's see. Okay. So all the requests that we do, as we said, are available on our webpage and can be used as a source of information. So as you can see, our advisory requests are organized by subject matter. And you can see the question asked, the date the research was completed, and which law center attorney worked on the request. So these can be a good source of information. The only note being, if it's, kind of completed more in the past, you might want to check with us to see if there's been any legal updates to those memos that are already on our website. So to point out some of the requests referred to in this webinar, you will see that, those Hurricane Sandy requests that we had talked about are under beach issues. The Great Lakes fact sheets are under invasive species. The Maryland stormwater requests are under miscellaneous, which is a catch-all for memos that don't really fit into another category. And then the South Carolina request is under Virgin Water Fund. So we'll provide kind of this week later on in the webinar. But again, you can go to our website, which you can see right there, and kind of play with it and click on all the memos to kind of go inside them. We're having some issues here with sharing it, and so we apologize for that. But it is a great piece of information, and we encourage you guys to really go out there and see kind of the work we've done in the past. Okay, so to wrap up the webinar, that's really what we had covered to kind of go through with everyone today. So again, if you have a legal question for us, please reach out to either contacting Stephanie, our director, Tara, our law fellow, Alex Chase, and myself, and we'll really work with you on developing your advisory request. So if you have a question and you're not necessarily sure if it's the right thing to ask, how to ask it, don't let that be a barrier to asking us. Please reach out to us, and we'll work with you kind of through this process that we just went through. I want to also note that our next webinar is going to be on October 4th at 2 p.m. And like the South Carolina request that I mentioned earlier, our law fellow Alex Chase is going to be talking about local land use conflicts and shellfish operations. So at this point, if you have a question, we'd encourage you to kind of use the chat box here on the webinar to kind of reach out and ask us, and Tara and I will be happy to answer them to the best of our ability.
Okay, so it looks like we have a question that says, does the National Sea Grant Law Center research international law, specifically laws from the U.S. freely associated states?
So again, as we mentioned earlier in the webinar, we'll kind of take international treaties and agreements with that caveat again that if it's something, once we get the direct questions from the program, if it's not something that we feel like we're comfortable in answering and it's not something in our expertise, we'll work with the program to kind of see what other sources of information or who else they can reach out to just to make sure that you're getting the best information possible. So again, technically, yes, we could answer international law, and then we'll just have to work with the program to see what the question is that we can answer. So we'll wait a second to see if anyone else has any other questions. If not, I encourage you again to go to our website and click on the advisory link, and you can kind of click through our old advisory request to get an idea of what we've done in the past. So with that, we'll wrap up, and thank you for joining us today. And please, again, reach out to us if you have a question.
All right, thanks, everyone.